So, you've painted a wall, right? You've laid down what you think is a perfect coat, you step back to admire your work, and then you see it. Those awful little drips, those tears running down the surface. Well, that's paint sacking, and today we're going to figure out exactly what it is, and more importantly, how to beat it.
Here's the game plan. First, we're going to get a good look at the problem itself. Then, we'll dive into the two big players in this fight, the constant downward pull of gravity and the paint's secret weapon, something called rheology. And finally, we'll see how both the chemists in the lab and the painters on the job can tip the scales and win the battle for that perfect, smooth finish.
All right, let's get right into it.
So what exactly are we up against here? Well, in the coatings industry, they call it vertical surface sagging. And it really is that simple. It's that frustrating moment where your wet paint decides to take a slide when it should be staying put.
So what does that actually mean? It just means the paint is giving into gravity before it gets a chance to dry. Simple as that. The wet film is just too heavy for its own good, and it starts to slip.
And listen, don't make the mistake of thinking this is just about looks. Yeah, the drips are ugly, but the real problem is that thin spot at the top of the sag. That spot is a major weak point. It's where the coating is most likely to fail, leaving the surface underneath open to stuff like rust and corrosion. So this is absolutely a functional failure, not just a cosmetic one.
Okay, so if sagging is the problem, who's the bad guy in this story? Well, it's the one you'd expect, gravity. That constant, invisible force that's always working against us.
And believe it or not, the physics here is actually pretty simple. The downward force on the paint, what we call shear stress, it really just comes down to two things that we can actually control: how dense or heavy the paint is, and how thick we lay it on the wall.
So you might be wondering, does thickness really matter that much? Oh yeah, it's a huge deal. As you can see, the stress on that paint film doesn't just increase a little, it skyrockets as the coat gets thicker. I mean, it makes sense, right? More paint means more weight for gravity to grab onto, and that means a whole lot more risk.
So, is there a magic number? Well, kind of. Years of experience in the industry tell us that once you get a wet film thicker than about 80 micrometers, and to put that in perspective, that's often thinner than a single strand of human hair, you are officially in the danger zone. Okay, so we've met the villain, gravity. Now it's time to meet the hero of our story, rheology. It's a fancy word, I know, but it's just the science of how things flow, and it's what gives paint its inner strength to defy gravity.
And this gets us to the core challenge of making good paint. See, when you're brushing it on, you need it to be thin and flowy, but the second you lift that brush, you need it to instantly get thick and stay put. A great paint really has to have a split personality.
So how does it do that? Well, the first part of the magic is something called yield stress. The best way to think about it is like a bottle of ketchup. You can turn it upside down and nothing happens, right? Gravity isn't strong enough. You have to give it a good smack. You have to apply a force greater than its yield stress before it starts to flow. Paint is the same way. It's the gatekeeper.
The second piece of this amazing puzzle is thixotropy. This is the paint's ability to get thick again right after you've stopped brushing. But here's the crucial part. It's all about speed. If it recovers too slowly, the paint sags. But if it recovers too fast, you're left with ugly brush marks. It is a really, really delicate balance.
Okay, so if rheology is our hero, how do we give it more power? Well, the first line of attack starts in the lab, by literally engineering sag resistance right into the paint's DNA.
Remember we said density was a key part of the problem? Well, where does that density come from? This table lays it out perfectly. The resins and solvents are pretty light, but look at the pigments and fillers. Those are the heavy hitters. So for a chemist, controlling these is job number one. So how do they build that inner strength? Well, one of the cleverest tricks is using special additives that create what's called a house of cards structure inside the paint. It's brilliant. As you brush, you're knocking the cards down, which lets the paint flow easily. But the instant you stop, that structure snaps right back into place, building a 3D web that traps all those heavy pigments and holds everything exactly where it should be. It's like a tiny self-healing scaffold.
But, and this is a big but, even the most perfectly designed paint in the world can be defeated by a bad application. And that brings us to our second, and just as important, strategy.
Out on the job, a painter has a whole arsenal of weapons to fight gravity. Rule number one always is film thickness. I'm telling you, 2 thin coats are always better than 1 thick one. But on top of that, things like your spray technique and even the temperature of the room can make or break the final job.
And here's a super specific, really practical pro tip. That distance, 10 to 15 centimeters, that's about 4 to 6 inches, that is the absolute sweet spot.
If you get too close, the film gets too thick and it's going to sag. But if you're too far away, the paint can actually start to dry in the air before it even hits the wall.
All right, let's bring this all home and wrap up by looking at the fundamental conflict that's happening inside every single can of paint.
When you get right down to it, it's all about this eternal battle. On one side, you've got gravity, fueled by the paint's thickness and its density, doing everything it can to pull that paint down the wall. And on the other side, you've got rheology, using the incredible powers of yield stress and thixotropy to stand firm and hold the line.
So the next time you pick up a paintbrush, you'll know that a perfect, sag-free finish isn't just luck, it's science. It's a carefully won victory, achieved by balancing these two powerful opposing forces, through smart chemistry inside the can and precise technique out on the wall. Which leaves just one question. Is your paint smart enough for the job?